In case my voice gives out, I brought some honey, ginger and turmeric tea on stand. Forgive me for quaffing, but I think it'll probably make it through. First of all, please let me say that this conference is full of scholars who spent their life working on this field. What you're about to hear is basically an account of a holiday trip with my children to Bamiyan. So, apologies for the amateurishness of this. This is not my field, as you know, but given that Bamiyan is a place not many people go to, there may be some interesting things that come out of it, I hope. Of the many places suggested for the possible site of the Garden of Eden, the Bamiyan Valley in central Afghanistan might seem at first one of the more surprising choices. In 1799, the pioneering and somewhat eccentric Orientalist, Captain Francis Wilford, announced to the startled readers of Asiatic Researches, newly published from Calcutta, its readers already counted Shelley among them, that the celebrated Valley of the Buddhas was the real location of the terrestrial paradise. His evidence was the fact that the four rivers flowed out of the Bamiyan Valley, bolstered by some spectacularly dubious etymology. More recently, of course, Bamiyan has been associated with one of the greatest cultural tragedies of our day, the dynamiting by the Taliban in 2001 of some of the oldest and certainly the largest colossal Buddhas ever carved. In visiting Bamiyan today, particularly as I saw it last year towards the end of October, caught in the deepest embrace of autumn, it is really not that difficult to understand how Wilford came to his conclusion. Bamiyan means the place of shining light. And there is indeed something quite out of the ordinary about the clarity and sharp, high-altitude intensity of the light illuminating this hidden valley, hanging suspended on the edge of the Hindu Kush. I've never seen light quite like this. 3 days later, the rains came and washed away these autumn leaves. And we saw it just at this last moment, with the leaves turning these extraordinary colours and the snow already dusting the snow peaks of the Hindu Kush behind. Surrounded on all sides by these spectacular mountains. It's a very short 20-minute flight from Kabul. You pass over the foothills of the Hindu Kush, over these massive peaks. And then you suddenly hit a bit of green amid all the snow and the peaks. And you come down into this, blazing in the last light of autumn, these extraordinary colours. As we touched down on the airstrip, the lines of poplars all around us were turning molten autumnal yellow against the pale salmon pink of the cliffs. Here, even at a distance, the bright, slanting morning light picked out with great precision the strangely moving vision of the two vast, empty niches. There is a real and significant presence here, even in the absence of the figures they once contained. We were surrounded on all sides by successive ramparts of camel-coloured foothills, each rising through the etched white on black rib cage of the lower part of the pure white of the snow peaks. To one side in the distance, the black massif of the Koi Baba, on the other, successive precipitous ranges of the Hindu Kush. Yet immediately around us, lay one of the greenest and most lovely valleys in the world, a hanging oasis of mulberry and apricot orchards, fertile fields giving way at the edges of the valley to a rich winter pastureland of burridge and clover, dotted with small yellow asphodels and ragged pink hollyhocks. Through all this, along the rivulets, semi-nomadic shepherds now herding great brindling flocks of fat-tailed sheep. White doves fluttered among the poplars and umbrella pines. Cut off by geography from most of the troubles of the rest of the world, Bamiyan remains a place of almost otherworldly beauty, and for the time being at least, if not at peace, then at least it has an absence of war. Afghanistan is, at the moment, getting more and more dangerous year by year. It's not just the creeping Talibanization of the rural south and the Pashtun pockets to the north that is a cause to worry, so much as also the growth of criminality and banditry across the rest of the country. Yet amid this grim picture of growing insecurity, Bamiyan remains almost completely untouched by the violence. The Hazaras who lived here suffered doubly from the Taliban, both as ancestral enemies of the Pashtuns and as Shias. And having been virtually enslaved by the last Taliban government, they are now united in allowing the Taliban no foothold in their lands. And since 2001, there has not been one single incident in Bamiyan of Taliban activity. For a place so distant and isolated today, Bamiyan's ancient history is astonishingly globalized and cosmopolitan. Alexander the Great and his Macedonians passed this way on their way to Balkh, where Alexander went on to marry Roxana. The mystic and philosopher Mani, the father of the Manichaeans, is believed to have lived and studied here shortly afterwards. But Bamiyan's golden age was during the period of Buddhist efflorescence between the 4th and 6th centuries, just as the golden age of Gandhara was winding down slightly to the south. At its peak, this is one of my favourite shots, just looking out of the monk's cell onto this extraordinary scene. You see the rock-carved steps leading from one cell to another. The whole cliff face is like a wasp nest or a termite's nest of thousands and thousands of portals and caves and stairwells. So here we are, yet another of the same map that we've had throughout this conference, but this one's got Bamiyan marked on it, and you can see where we are relative to India and the Mediterranean coast. Bamiyan, as you see, quite far north of the areas we've been talking about so far. At its peak, Bamiyan was one of the largest Hinayana Buddhist monastic centres of its age. It had over 1,000 caves, that's not counting the subsidiary valleys nearby, Kakrak and Fuladi, which have several hundred more. It alone has over 1,000 caves, compared to 31 in Ajanta, or 500, the most famous of the Buddhist sites in China, Dunhuang. The caves were sometimes simple cells and chapels, at other times large vihara residences connected with basilicas, intended for congregational worship. The different monasteries were occupied at a time when South Asian culture in the form of Buddhist religion and Sanskrit literature was spreading up the Silk Road into China, when Chinese scholars and pilgrims were heading southwards to the Buddhist holy places and universities of the Gangetic Plain. We're now in the Gupta period, Sarnath and Bodh Gaya, the great University of Nalanda, then the greatest repository of learning in the east of Alexandria. Its wisdom and learning sought by scholars and pilgrims across the region. Bamiyan was an important stopping off point for monks, pilgrims, scholars, artists and ideas heading in both directions. At this period it was Afghanistan and not Gandhara that became the epicenter of classical trade routes, midway from both Rome and China, and from the Sogdian trading posts of Central Asia, and the rich cities of late Gupta India. Fertile and green, Bamiyan has always been a natural stopping point for caravans heading in 4 directions. Until the mid-20th century, was the main resting place for merchants and pilgrims, especially those heading from Balkh to Peshawar and back again. The 5th and 6th centuries was probably the moment that Indian culture's diffusion northwards reached its peak, towards the end of what the textbooks like to call the golden age of the Guptas, whether or not one chooses to embrace that term. But it's certainly a moment of great prosperity and growing international trade. when in Indian cultures it's most confident and widely admired. This, of course, is the age that Puranas, reaching their final shape, are in butters, calculating the length of the solar year, using the two crucial Indian inventions of zero and Arabic numerals. Asanga, Vasubandhu are at work. The profound ideas of Vedanta are being compiled. Sanskrit drama and poetry, Kalidasa, Shakuntala, and of course the Kama Sutra. Gupta innovations were extremely important to the art of Afghanistan and the lands beyond. Kurt had a wonderful exhibition in the Met, a one-room but very gorgeous exhibition a couple of years ago called Buddhism Along the Silk Route. And one of the star exhibits was this unbelievably gorgeous Gupta-influenced head coming from Hada, near Jalalabad, near the Khyber. And although much of the paintwork has survived, giving it a eerily contemporary feel, the abstracted treatment of the eyes and the intersecting planes defining the forehead, eyebrows and nose are all features shared with Gupta art, and we've moved a long way from the faces we were seeing yesterday in black schist. It's interesting that it's towards the very end of the Gupta period, in the period following the Guptas, when Bamiyan was probably at its greatest, most flourishing and greatest commercial importance, and it's this period that the Buddhas are carved. It's not at the peak of Gupta power, but following it. When, during the precipitous decline of the later 6th century, as tribes of Huns invaded North India, disrupting the old trade routes and bringing two regions under one political leadership. This also created a diaspora of displaced Brahmins, artists and intellectuals who diffused around the region, taking refuge in more remote areas such as the Pamirs, the Hindu Kush, Kashmir, and the furthest Himalayan passes, so spreading even more widely their ideas, rituals and art forms. But the visitors from Bamiyan were not just from India, as we last saw in those spectacular pictures from the National Museum. French archaeologists have been digging up in this region exotic objects, painted glass from Roman Antioch, inlaid gold vessels from Ctesiphon, porphyry items from Upper Egypt, lapis from Badakhshan, horses from Mongolia, and lacquers, porcelain, paper, and of course silk from Xi'an, and the great cities of eastern China. It was through this now remote valley that rival ideas of dress and decorum, religion, painting, and court culture passed backwards and forwards, east to west and back again, mixing and melding to create the most unexpectedly syncretic conjunctions of the sort Naman described so beautifully yesterday. Sometime, probably in the 6th century, the main bodies of the Buddhas were hewn directly from the sandstone cliffs, but details were modelled in mud mixed with straw and coated with stucco. Very interesting, thinking of what Kurt was saying yesterday about this succession, going from small narrative images to large iconic images, and then to stucco. So by the time this is carved, they're not even attempting to finish the face in stone. They create a block platform. You can see, in a sense, the socket. The face was always going to be in stucco rather than in stone. The coating, practically all of which wore away long ago, was painted to enhance the expressions of the faces, fans, hands, and folds of the robes. The larger one was painted carmine red, and the smaller ones painted multiple colours. The lower parts of the statue's arms were constructed from the same mud-straw mix, while supported on wooden armatures. It is believed that the upper part of the faces were made from great wooden masks, or casts. Rows of holes that can be seen in photographs were spaces that held wooden pegs that stabilized the outer stucco. In an age when we are used to prodigiously high structures, the sheer scale of the Buddhas can still take us back. This was even more so in 1886, when the Illustrated London News celebrated war artist William Simpson to draw the statues. To give an understanding of the size of the Bamiyan Buddhas, Simpson invited his readers to imagine what he called a general meeting of all the colossal statues of the world. The colossi of Luxor would check in at 51 feet and would be taller if they could stand out of their seats, he wrote. Also present at this curious AGM would be the 4 statues of Ramesses II at Abu Simnel, about 51 feet high, the bronze Japanese Buddha Todaiji, 49 feet, the statue of Athene on the Parthenon, 39 feet, the Colossus of Rhodes, 120 feet, and the Statue of Liberty, 137 feet. None of these, wrote Simpson, would barely approach the knees of the larger of the 2 Buddhas, which originally stood 180 feet high. Certainly when Huan Sang passed through Bamiyan around 629 AD, he was astonished and transfixed by the then gilt and jewelled image, whose face flashed out from its niche. To the north of the royal city, on the side of the mountain, there is a stone statue, he wrote, of a standing Buddha. It is 150 feet high, of dazzling gold colour, and resplendent with ornamentation of precious substances. The golden hue sparkles on every side, and precious ornaments dazzle the eye with their brightness. To the east of the monastery, he continued, to the east is a monastery built by an earlier king. East of this is a standing image of Sakyamuni Buddha, more than 100 feet high, made of brass, the pieces of which have been cast separately and then assembled to make a statue. He was also impressed by the number of monasteries in the vicinity, 10 convents in all, he said, and 1,000 monks who lived in them. These people, he writes, are remarkable among their neighbours for their love of religion, and their hearts are full of pure faith. From the highest to the lowest, there is utmost devotion. Like all subsequent visitors, he was taken aback by the quality of light and the beauty of the valley, with springs, feeding pools, bright as mirrors, he wrote, and herbage that is green and bright. I want to be there at the same time as me, seeing that extraordinary autumnal quality. Huan Sang says clearly that both the standing images represented the Buddha as Lokatara, the Lord of the world, in whom the totality of the universe is personified. In other words, the colossalism is not about megalomania of its anonymous patrons, so much as an attempt to express literally the spiritual size and grandeur of the Buddha. Huan Sang also mentions a Buddha lying in a sleeping position, a full 1,000 feet long, 5 times the size of the larger of the 2 standing Buddhas. In 2008, fragments of another giant Buddha's arm, neck and shoulder were discovered underground, halfway between the 2 standing figures by the Franco-Afghan archaeologist Zalmalai. This was indeed a sleeping Buddha that once extended fully 60 feet, but clearly not the 1,000-foot colossus mentioned by Huan Sang. It remains a moot point among archaeologists if the sleeping Buddha still exists under the scree, whether its prodigious length is in fact due to a scribal copying error, corrupting the original text. In style, the stiff pose of the 2 standing Buddhas and the way their garments seem to cling to them seem to show some Parthian influence, and its full frontal assertiveness, we moved away from the humanizing Hellenistic influences that dominated the art we were seeing yesterday. In contrast, much of the wall painting seems to derive its iconography from Indian and especially late Gupta influences, notably the fondness of the Bamiyan artists for showing the Buddha sitting cross-legged, enclosed within a circular mandala, and linked to other mandalas, each symbolizing heavens populated with more Buddhas. Among the murals were, before their destruction, arguably the oldest oil paintings in the world. Scientists in the European synchrotron radiation facility, whatever that may be, have confirmed that the oil paintings, probably bound in either walnut or poppy seed oil, are present in 12 of the caves, dating from the 5th to the 9th centuries. The murals typically have a white base layer of lead compound, followed by upper layers of natural pigments mixed with either resins or walnut and poppy seed drying oils. These include a magnificently syncretic image of the Greek sun god Helios wearing Persian Zoroastrian costume, but painted in a manner strongly influenced both by the style and iconography of Gupta India, a successor to the earlier Gandhara work discussed yesterday so beautifully by Naman. Some scholars have proposed that there was an elaborate sermon being preached in stone at Bamiyan, that the different statues and intervening wall paintings were part of a highly intellectualized program that took the pilgrim on a kind of spiritual biography of Shakyamuni. This may have been so, but we'll probably never know. Hyun Sang is almost the only contemporary witness that we have. And unlike the Indian Buddhist caves of the same date, many of which are filled with Pali texts recording the thoughts and intentions of the donors, Bamiyan has yet to yield a single line of inscription. A very odd situation if you consider the profusion of them in Ajanta. Maybe the Indian monks more literate than Afghan ones, who knows? In 2003, archaeologists found to their great excitement fragments of Buddhist manuscripts in Sanskrit and the Gilgit script dating from the 7th century. Sadly, on translation, it turned out to be only land and marriage contracts, which shed no light at all on the Buddha's elusive patrons. Fascinating as it is, frustrating as it is, the silence only adds to the mystery. No names survived associated with these great works of labour, nor with the extensive outlying complexes of caves and monasteries that extend down narrower, but equally green and beautiful Fuladi and Kakrak valleys. I certainly hadn't realised before I visited that this was Bamiyan is only one of a whole complex of valleys, all of which contain monastic complexes. And using Bamiyan as a base, it's possible to spend several weeks just exploring different caves in all directions. Fuladi, particularly the Kakrak Valley, you see heading south, due south from Bamiyan here. This is looking out over Bamiyan from the City of Screams. There's an extraordinary sight opposite it. This is all the City of Screams. But this is what guards the Fuladi Valley, this extraordinary line of Kushan fortifications jutting out of these hills, crumbling into the hills. The old time itself, they're fantastic things. The caves in Fuladi and Kakrak contain yet more forgotten wall paintings, squidged domes, sculpted and coiffured ceilings, and more fragments of broken and dynamited Buddha statues. Looters and the Taliban have damaged these too, yet tantalizing fragments remain in almost all the caves, and you can walk safely for miles down the valley, chancing on ancient site after ancient site that appear in no guidebook. According to the French archaeologists who dug these sites, Buddhism survived until the 10th century in the outlying monasteries around Fuladi and Kakrak, long after Islam had replaced Buddhism as the religion of the rulers in Bamiyan itself. According to the archaeological record, the arrival of Arab rule was marked by no sudden or catastrophic change. The Arab conquerors who set up in Bamiyan have left surviving documentation which shows that they conducted their administration in the Bactrian language written in the Greek script and seem to have held surprisingly syncretic religious beliefs. One recent document, discovered from the 8th century, 100 years after the arrival of Islam, refers both to Zoroaster and Waksh, the god of the Indus River, who is called on, somewhat surprisingly, to witness an Islamic marriage contract. In time, Bamiyan became one of the main centres of the Ghaznavid Turkish Empire, which by which stage stories of Afghanistan's former wealth had entered folklore. By the time of the medieval physician Abu Ubaid al-Juzani, writing in the early 11th century, it was widely believed that Bamiyan's former rulers, quote, had been famous and celebrated from the most remote ages for the abundance of their riches, the vastness of their treasures, the number of their mines and their buried wealth. For that country is littered with mines of gold, silver, rubies and crystal, as well as lapis and garnets and other precious things. It was partly such rumours that drew the next wave of conquerors, the Mongols, who marched down the valley in 1222. The Ghaznavid warriors put up strong resistance and managed to kill the grandson of Genghis, which only sealed their fate. This is City of Screams. When the city was finally captured, according to legend, the secret entrance to the city was betrayed by a princess who wished to marry Genghis. The Mongol emperor ordered that in retaliation, every living creature in the city, men, women and children, even livestock and dogs, should be killed and no quarter be given. Even the princess who betrayed the secret watergate through which the Mongols entered was ordered to be stoned to death. Ever since then, the citadel, known as Shah-i-Golgola, the City of Screams. Today, the former citadel is still a wonderfully sinister place, sitting on a skull-like knob of rock, commanding remarkable views down the Bamiyan Valley to the snow peaks beyond. When I was there last autumn, we were shown around by Thomas Lochain, an archaeologist who's just uncovered a maze of gates, barracks and bazaars leading up to the citadel, where he's revealed the elegant chambers of the Ghaznavid warrior aristocracy. Yet even now, the city has a sinister reputation. A line of red-painted stones near the summit indicates the end of the demined zone. Beyond lies unexploded ordnance and packs of huge feral dogs. 2 years ago, one of Thomas' colleagues wandered by mistake one evening beyond the lines, possibly after a drink or two. He escaped the landmines, but was hunted down and torn apart by a pack of wild dogs. There are still several people in the bazaars of Bamiyan who remember the day that the Buddhas were blown up. I interviewed several of them, and this account brings together their records. Initially, the statues were fired at by Taliban anti-aircraft guns and artillery. This caused severe damage, but it did not destroy them. The Taliban information minister, Qadratullah Jamal, was quoted as saying, "This work of destruction is not as simple as people think. You can't just knock down these statues by shelling, as both are carved into the cliff, and they are firmly attached to the mountain." By 2001, the valley had been almost depopulated by the cruelties of the victorious Taliban, and it was almost deserted. Most of the young men of fighting age had fled either to Iran or to the ever-shrinking areas of Panjshir or Mazar-i-Sharif, controlled by the Northern Alliance. Therefore, it took a whole week for the Taliban, led by officers from the Ministry of the Prevention of Vice and the Promotion of Virtue, to round up enough forced labour to begin the work of laying charges. Some unfortunate Hazaras were suspended on pieces of wood attached by ropes, hanging dangerously from the niche above the Buddha's heads, and were told to drill down charges every 10 feet. Others were forced to move a massive cache of munitions, a mixed accumulation of shells, landmines, and sticks of dynamite, into position at the base of the two colossal statues. On the 2nd of March, 2001, 4 planes arrived at the Bamiyan landing strip. They carried senior dignitaries from both Taliban and Al-Qaeda. These included both Mullah Omar and the man who was increasingly becoming his main advisor, Osama bin Laden. Waiting for them were 400 Taliban who'd arrived in a fleet of Datsun pickups. On the command, as the Al Jazeera cameras whirred, the charges were blown, and to the cries of Allahu Akbar, the 2 colossal statues exploded into a cloud of dust. A deliberate challenge to the outside world, and the ultimate demonstration of the Taliban's opposition to idol worship, even in the face of advice from Al-Azhar-trained Egyptian clerics that such a course of action was un-Islamic. With the Buddhas went some of the finest wall paintings in Central Asia. As The Economist put it shortly afterwards, soon there will be no more religions for the Taliban to insult. The future of Bamiyan is as uncertain as the rest of Afghanistan. The Taliban are advancing and widening their control over much of the rural south and the Pashtun centres of the north, but they're still nowhere near Bamiyan. So for those of you who might be tempted to visit, there is a wonderful Japanese-owned hotel built in Bamiyan in happier times, which still remains open and still offers presumably the only teriyaki and maki rolls in the Hindu Kush. A new airport terminal opened last November too, along with Japanese assistance. And there are 3 flights a week from Kabul, a spectacular 30-minute, 70-kilometre hop over some of the most precipitous mountains of the world. We saw earlier I've never been on such an extraordinary flight in my life. There's nothing crossing here through this and that. And then these little slivers of green before you get to the valley itself. There are even calls from some of the locals that the Buddha should be rebuilt, a scheme UNESCO is not dismissing, which remains on the table. Fragments of the Buddha lie catalogued in a warehouse at the base of the cliff, waiting such a scheme, though the proposal has alarmed many archaeologists and conservationists who see it perhaps rightly as a Disneyfication of the monument. One other solution, which was mooted last year, was the attempt of merely projecting the Buddha back onto it, which is what you see happening here. Anywhere else, this astonishingly beautiful valley, containing six World Heritage Sites, would attract tens of thousands of visitors every day. Instead, visitors today more or less have it to themselves. The occasional company of NGO workers, war correspondents, and the odd stray archaeologist. The future is uncertain, but my advice is go quick.
Beautifully written, very feeling education models. Bamiyan. I think there are many in this room who want to take our advice and book them.
It really is not dangerous yet, and it really is quite possible to do. The only dodgy bit of a couple of nights in Kabul, don't stay in hotels, stay with friends or the embassy or something. But it's quite possible to do still, and it may never be, there may be nothing left if you make it. You miss your chance.
It's extraordinary how the MP dishes are still so evocative. In a way, the absence isn't actually such a strong one, right? The place is still absolutely suffused with the presence of the sculpture. Are there any questions or comments?
I'm not sure I'll be capable of answering, but you're welcome to ask.
If not, we can thank you very briefly.